This is the devastating case of Kylie Rodney. On August 6, 2022, 16-year-old Kylie went missing at Prosser Family Campground in Truckee, California. Kylie attended a school party with more than 100 kids, but it's alleged that older people also showed up, which made a lot of the teens uncomfortable. Kylie texted her mom right before midnight and told her that she would be home in 45 minutes, but the following morning, Kylie's mother got super worried when Kylie was still not home. One of Kylie's friends said that she was with her the entire evening until she decided to go home at 12:20 a.m. Police searched Prosser Lake for more than 15 hours but were unable to find Kylie's vehicle. But on August 21st, a group of divers who go by the name Adventures with Purpose decided that they would help look for Kylie. It didn't take the group of divers much time to locate Kylie's car, only 14 feet underwater. The car was upside down and Kylie's body was inside. The investigation is still ongoing and the autopsy results have not been released yet. So what do you guys think happened to Kylie? Was this a tragic accident or was there foul play involved?
I have no idea why, but 2022 has cracked open so many cold cases. So many cases that have been unsolved for years and years have been solved. And we are one step closer to solving the boy in the box mystery, which is huge. This case happened in 1957, so years ago. And if you're unfamiliar with this case, a young boy was found deceased inside of a box in Philadelphia, and no one knew who he was, where he came from, and why he had to die. And I think this is probably one of the most well-known unsolved mysteries. But I can sit here today and tell you that this boy has finally been given back his identity. Now, I say this, I'm about to burst your bubble. His name has not yet been released. The reason why is because the Philadelphia Police Department are going to do a conference on this next week, and as soon as I find out, I will be sure to let you know of this boy's identity and if they have any leads that could lead to an arrest, if they're still alive, which is highly unlikely at this point. This is one of the cases as well that everyone was convinced was never going to get solved. People were starting to give up hope, but through DNA testing, he has been given his identity back. And as soon as updates come out, I will be sure to let you know.
Unsolved cases that keep me up at night. On January 16, 2014, a group of 4 friends were playing a game of dares. One of them was dared to go into this cornfield that was rumored to be responsible for the many disappearances in the area. The friend agreed, following the rules of the game, and ventured into the cornfield by himself. For what felt like hours had gone by, the 3 friends had lost track of the man and were starting to get worried. Too afraid to go on themselves, they contacted the police, and the police showed up after a while and searched the area. They searched and they didn't find any trace of the guy, but they did find his phone, and after going through his phone, they found the last photo captured before his disappearance.
Babies kept passing away around this nurse. When investigators took a closer look, they were shocked by what they found.
Lucy Lepty is a 32-year-old nurse who is currently on trial for taking the lives of 7 babies. She's also been accused of harming a further 10. It is alleged that she did this between the years 2015 to 16. It all started when her mentor at Chester Hospital started noticing a disturbing pattern every time Lucy was left on shift. Babies under her care would mysteriously fall sick and pass away. This would include stable babies that had no signs for concern. Now, the number of babies that were passing away was very unusual for the hospital, and so they investigated. That's when they started accusing Lucy of injecting air into babies' bloodstreams. This is what would cause them to fall ill very quickly. Now, Lucy has not been found guilty yet. It's important to note that this trial is still underway. For more, remember to press the plus button and follow.
Imagine being on the phone with your son and hearing the exact moment he disappeared forever. That's what happened to the parents of Brandon Swanson, who mysteriously vanished in 2008. That year, on May 14th, Brandon went out to celebrate the end of classes with his friends. After attending a couple of parties, he decided to drive home. However, instead of taking the most direct route, he drove through a farming road and accidentally ended up in a ditch. Brandon was okay, but he called his parents asking them to come and fetch him. But although they drove around the area he told them he was in for hours, they couldn't find him in the dark. He then suggested they meet in the parking lot of a nearby nightclub and decided to cross a field to take a shortcut. Brandon's father was on the phone with his son, and he suddenly heard him shout, "Oh," before the call was cut off. Brandon's phone was turned off after that, and he was never seen again. Despite the extensive search effort involving police dogs, air surveillance, and hundreds of volunteers, the teen's disappearance still remains a mystery.
The case of the Dardeen family was one that was deemed too gruesome for news stations and daytime television shows such as Oprah, and to this day, nearly 25 years later, it still remains unsolved. The family consisted of 29-year-old Russell Keith, wife Ruby Elaine, who was 30 and 7 months pregnant at the time, and their 3-year-old son, who they had named Peter. The growing family had recently moved to the small town of Ina, Illinois in 1986 and were living in a rented-out trailer near Route 37. And though this was a small town, it did not have a reputation for being the safest. During the past 2 years, this small town had experienced 15 homicides, including that of a 10-year-old girl that had recently been murdered in the area. This had left everyone in the town, including the Dardeens, on edge, and in fact, when a woman had approached the trailer asking for help one night, Keith would flat out deny her and ask her to leave the property. The family had felt so unsafe here that Keith had told his mother, Joanne Dardeen, that regardless if he had a job lined up or not, he and the family would be moving out of the small town by the end of the year. But then came the night of November 17th, 1987. Keith, who had always been described as a reliable worker, had failed to show up to work that night, and after workers and family had failed to reach either him or Elaine, they decided to contact the police. Keith's father had agreed to meet with officials at the Dardeen residence, unaware of the horrors that they were about to discover. There is a major trigger warning for the rest of this episode, but once Keith's father and officials had made their way into the household, they would discover 3 bodies that were tucked inside Keith and Elaine's bed. The bodies had belonged to that of Elaine, their 3-year-old son Peter, and the newborn infant that Elaine had given birth to during the attack. All had been found deceased in the bed. Keith's body was nowhere to be found within the house, and much to the shock of the family, this led investigators to believe him to be the prime suspect in this case. But that theory would be put to rest when just the very next day, a group of hunters would find Keith Dardeen's body about a mile away from their trailer. He had been found, shot 3 times, and then sexually mutilated. His car would also later be found right in front of the police department in that town. The town immediately began to swirl with rumors, as over 30 detectives had to chase down over 1,000 leads, but unfortunately those leads really came to nothing. There was no sign of an affair, drug use or drug selling, or any type of gambling debt that the family could have had, and this went on for years until one solid lead came up, which I'll have to make in a part 2.
Killers that got caught for being stupid, part 3. And this is a series I've been doing, so make sure you follow along. I just felt like I had to make this video, but we're gonna talk about this guy right here. I remember when the Idaho tragedy first happened, there was this idea going around online that some criminal mastermind had done this, that it was a serial offender that was never going to get caught. When in reality, no, it was just done by this dumbass. And you could tell that he thinks he's the smartest guy ever, but we're here to knock him down a peg. For one, Brian had his phone on him the entire time he was casing the house leading up to the crime and for most of the night he committed the crime. And when the cops got his phone records, he literally drew a map of him driving straight to the crime scene that night. And the reason the cops had enough evidence to grab his phone records was he left part of the weapon he used in the house that night in a room that he locked behind him. So even if he did realize he had left it there was no way for him to retrieve it. And he walked straight past one of the surviving roommates, somehow without seeing her, and she was able to give an exact description of him to the police. And the police went to go question Brian because they knew he drove a white Elantra, but the first thing they noticed was that he had the bushy eyebrows that the roommate described the person in the house having. So the next time you see his stupid photo and hear, oh, he was a PhD student, he was learning how to commit the perfect crime, no. Was lost in highs, pushing you aside. I couldn't let you back in. But now I'm ready to fix all those careless lips, wishing we could start.
Breaking news, here's some live footage in the new search for Madeline McCann. Take a look. I'll keep you guys updated. What do you think? Drop in the comments.
If your wife is missing, why would you Google how to dispose of a woman's body? 39-year-old Anna Walsh was last seen leaving her Cohasset, Massachusetts home around 4 a.m. on New Year's Day. There hasn't been any cell phone or bank activity since that day, and she hasn't been seen or heard from again. Anna shares the home with her husband Brian and their 3 kids. Just one day after she disappeared, Brian was caught on security footage at Home Depot buying $450 worth of cleaning supplies, maps, and a tarp. Anna wasn't reported missing until January 4th from both her husband and her employer after she failed to show up to work. When investigators searched the home, they found a broken knife and blood in the Walsh's basement. During the investigation, authorities were sent to a waste facility in Peabody, which is about an hour away from the family home. During their search, they found a hacksaw, a hatchet, and a bloody rug. Also found was a garbage bag containing blood as well as human tissue, all believed to be connected to Anna's disappearance. After looking into Brian, police discovered that after Anna went missing, he Googled, quote, how to dispose of a 115-pound woman's body, end quote. Just a few days ago, Brian was arrested and charged with misleading the police investigation into the disappearance of his wife, and he has since pleaded not guilty. He's currently being held on a $500,000 bail. This is not the first time that Brian has had run-ins with the law. In 2021, Brian pleaded guilty to charges related to an attempt to scam someone in LA using fake Andy Warhol paintings. Because of that, Brian was placed on home confinement, which was still taking place up until his recent arrest. Adding to that, he was also at the center of an ongoing dispute over his late father's will. His family members accused him of destroying the document and wrongly taking over his father's estate. According to Anna's mom, Anna had texted her on Christmas and said, quote, please mama, come tomorrow, end quote. Anna's mom said that she and Brian loved each other, but this seemed to allude to some problems, although Anna didn't mention exactly why she wanted her mom to come so urgently. According to her, Anna also recently mentioned her frustration with Brian's home confinement. This forced her to temporarily live alone in a Washington, D.C. home that Anna also owned. Anna worked a lot in Washington, D.C. and would often visit the home. Anna reportedly tried calling her mom around midnight on the night she went missing, as well as once more an hour later, but her mom was sleeping and missed the call. Right after, she also tried calling her sister and a friend, but they also missed the call. A friend of the Walshes has come forward and stated that he spent New Year's Eve with a couple and has said that there was no indication of any tragedy or trouble. But it's now been 10 days since Anna was last seen. This is an ongoing investigation, so hopefully more answers will come to light soon.
This story has so many twists and turns to it. This is Sophie Reader, and she was just 15 years old when she went missing in May of 2017. When Sophie was 2 years old, her parents ended up getting divorced, and for the first part of her life, she was living with her mother. Her mother was said to have been much more strict than her father was, so she did have quite a lot of rules, but unfortunately, Sophie was rebelling as a teenager. She would purposely disobey her mother, and sometimes she would run away from home, and at one point, she actually ran away for several days. Eventually, it got to the point where Sophie decided that she would rather live with her father, and apparently her father was much more relaxed and kind of gave her a little bit more freedom. When Sophie's mother was helping her pack to help her move to her father's house, she ended up finding some very surprising things in her bag. She discovered that her daughter, who was only 15 years old, had a lot of lingerie, she had alcohol, she had illegal substances as well. When she confronted Sophie about it, all she did was smile and laugh it off. When Sophie moved in with her father, he ended up getting her a cell phone, which actually ended up making the whole thing worse. She continued to act out and basically did whatever she wanted to do, and at one point she was even shoplifting. It got so bad that at one point her father ended up threatening her, saying that he was going to send her to an all-girls boarding school. On May 19, 2017, Sophie ended up sneaking out of the house where her father was living in Fort Lauderdale. The following morning, he's surprised to see that Sophie's not in her bedroom, so he calls her, texts her, but she's not responding. He then calls his ex-wife to see if Sophie maybe had gone off to see her mother, but she says that she hasn't seen her either, so they call and report her missing. According to her father, he said the last time he saw her was around 11:30 p.m. the night before she went missing. He did say that he saw that his daughter was pacing back and forth and she seemed kind of nervous, but he didn't really make a huge deal out of this, so he just ended up telling her to go to her room and go to bed. The next morning, when he goes to her bedroom around 9:30 in the morning, he sees that there is a lit candle, her laptop is there was also some money, and her bed was neatly made. However, then he noticed her calendar on her wall, and he noticed that on May 19th, she had drawn a big X on it. When they looked through her daughter's laptop, they were shocked to find out that she had actually been visiting sugar daddy websites. As they searched her bedroom again, they ended up finding a second secret cell phone under her bed, and it had several contacts in it.
And one of those contacts ended up being a former felon that she had been communicating with quite regularly. Sophie was caught on CCTV footage that night, and that's the last known sighting we have of her. She was said to have been wandering the streets till about 2:30 in the morning. And coincidentally, the man that she had been communicating with also lived in the area, and her cell phone pinged at his apartment at 9 o'clock in the morning the next day. Police believe that Sophie was very likely groomed by this ex-felon and was lured to his apartment. They then think that she probably fell victim to human trafficking. If you know anything about Sophie Reader, contact this number here.
The murderer and serial rapist known as Mr. Cruel is one of Australia's most infamous uncaught criminals. And this story will send shivers down your spine. So this story stretches all the way back to 1987, and that's where it begins, in Lower Plenty, Australia. It was at around 4 a.m. on August 22nd, 1987, when a man armed with a knife, a handgun, and wearing a balaclava broke into a family home in that town. This man then locked both of the parents in a closet, tied their young son onto a bed, and then proceeded to assault the 11-year-old daughter for hours on end. He had also cut the phone line, so there was no way that they could call for help. And these images that I'm showing on screen, like this one, are real police sketches. These sketches were based on the description of the attacker given by children and survivors of these assaults. The nickname Mr. Cruel was actually given to the perpetrator by the media after they discovered a police report where the perpetrator was described as being super cool and super cruel. But it would only be a few more months until Mr. Cruel would strike again, on December 27, 1987. On that day, it was late at night, he once again broke into a family home through a back door, this time at around 5:20 a.m., armed with a knife and a handgun, and wearing that same eerie mask. But this time the perpetrator bound and gagged the parents, demanded money, and then kidnapped their daughter. Now, in an interesting twist in this case, when Mr. Cruel actually abducted the 10-year-old daughter Sharon, he addressed her by her name as if he had known who she was before the attack occurred. After Mr. Cruel left with their daughter, the father in the family freed himself and rushed to call the police, but noticed that once again their phone lines had been cut. So he ran to the neighbor's house to phone the police, but sadly, their daughter was still gone. But just 18 hours later, 10-year-old Sharon would be discovered walking the streets dressed in a garbage bag. And her description of what had happened to her was extremely strange. Now, she had been assaulted multiple times and put through absolute hell, but she did tell the police that the perpetrator had given her a thorough bath. He had clipped her fingernails and her toenails, he had flossed her teeth and removed any forensic evidence. But once again, the only evidence that police had to go on about their perpetrator was the physical description of a man wearing a dark jumpsuit and that eerie ski mask. And even though Mr. Cruel was all over the newspapers, these are sketches that were provided by the police, no one knew who he was. But he was still there lurking in the shadows, and he would strike again soon. On July 3rd of 1990, in a town nearby the other two towns where the previous assaults had taken place, another child was kidnapped. It was 15-year-old Nicola Linus, pictured here. On that day, the Linus parents had left their two daughters alone at home while they were attending a party, and at around midnight, the two daughters were awoken, once again, by a man wearing a ski mask. He would end up taking 13-year-old Nicola hostage and leaving the other daughter in the house, and this is where the story takes a very strange and bizarre turn. I'm about to run out of time, but Mr. Cruel was a horrible man, and this story does unfortunately end in murder, so I'm going to post a part 2 here soon, and you can listen to our podcast Murder in America for more murder stories.